The grand obsidian rotunda of the High Synod was not designed for silence, yet silence was the heaviest thing within it. It was a chamber built to amplify the roar of conquerors, a vast architectural throat intended to sing the songs of the Ethelgardian Empire's dominance to the very stars that hung in the holographic projection above the central dais. The walls, carved from the bedrock of a dead moon and transported here across light years, rose in spiraling tiers, seating the representatives of 1,000 subjugated systems. The air usually vibrated with the hum of gravity dampeners and the fierce, rhythmic chanting of political debate, a cacophony of power that assured every being present that they were the apex of creation. But today, the rotunda was a tomb. The air was stagnant, tasting of recycled ozone and the copper tang of collective fear. The only sound was the rhythmic, terrified thrumming of a single ventilation fan, a mechanical heartbeat that seemed to mock the stillness of the gathered thousands. High Archon Valorous sat upon the throne of cinders, his 4 hands gripping the armrests with enough force to whiten the chitinous plates of his knuckles. He was old, his carapace scarred by the wars of unification, his eyes clouded with the milky film of centuries, but his mind remained a razor, honed by cycles of intrigue and governance. He looked out over the assembly, seeing the distinct physiological markers of fear in every species present. The amphibious Krell were secreting their stress mucus, creating slick puddles beneath their podiums. The crystalline Vracs were dim, their internal light pulsing in erratic, dissonant rhythms. The warrior caste Thrux stood rigid, but their mandibles twitched in a subconscious display of submission he had never witnessed in all his years of command. They were waiting for him to speak, to break the spell of the report that lay on the holographic slate before him. But Valorous found that he had no words, only a profound, hollow dread that echoed in the marrow of his bones. The report had come from the 7th sector, the region known colloquially as the Bleed, where the spiral arm of the galaxy frayed into the vast, suffocating nothingness of intergalactic space. For millennia, the Ethelgardian Empire had treated the Bleed as a natural border, a graveyard where the laws of physics grew tenuous and the stars burned cold and fitful. It was a place for exiles, for madmen, and for the disposal of dangerous waste. No civilized keel had cut the vacuum of the Bleed in 10,000 cycles. But the sensors, the deep void listening posts established during the golden age of expansion, had woken up. They had not screamed a warning of invasion. They had simply ceased to exist, one by one, silenced not by weapon fire, but by something far more terrifying: occupation. The telemetry that had been recovered before the silence fell did not show a fleet of warships. It showed a shadow. A shadow that spanned parsecs, moving against the backdrop of the cosmic microwave background like a hand closing over a candle flame. Archon, the voice was soft, trembling, belonging to Subminister Kalen, a scholar of the archives whose life had been spent amongst dust and data scrolls. Kalen stood at the foot of the dais, his small frame dwarfed by the statues of past emperors. The council awaits. The silence, it breeds panic. We must formulate a response. If the rim has fallen, if there is a predator in the dark. Valorous shifted, the sound of his ceremonial armor scraping against the throne echoing like a thunderclap. A predator, Valorous mused, his voice a low grind of tectonic plates. You speak of predators, Kalen, as if we are not the wolves of this galaxy. We broke the resistance of the Kalath. We shattered the moon fortresses of the Zephyr Dominion. We are the architects of order. What predator could silence the 7th sector without firing a shot? The reports say the stars went out, not destroyed. Hidden. Perhaps it is a natural phenomenon, General Thraxus interjected, stepping forward. He was a mountain of muscle and cybernetic plating, the supreme commander of the Imperial Armada. A hyperspatial rift, a collapse of the local vacuum energy. We are projecting fears onto astrophysics. I say we send the 3rd Fleet. We burn a path through the dark and see what lies beneath. If there are ships there, we break them. If it is a storm, we weather it. But we do not sit here shivering like prey. Valorous looked at the general, seeing the desperate bravado in the soldier's eyes. Thraxus was afraid, perhaps more than any of them, and his response to fear was violence. It was the way of the Empire. It was the way of all known life. When you encounter the unknown, you strike it until it stops moving, then you dissect it to understand why it moved in the first place. But Valorous felt a cold intuition, a whisper from the primitive hindbrain of his species, telling him that violence here would be like a child striking a mountain. We sent a probe, Valorous said, his voice silencing the murmurs that had begun to rise. Before the listening posts died, High Inquisitor Myra launched a deep-field sensory drone, a Class X stealth courier. It was programmed to observe and return. It returned 3 hours ago. The room seemed to drop in temperature. A courier returning from the dead zone. The data it carried would be the difference between survival and extinction. "Show us," Thraxus demanded, though his voice lacked its usual command. Valorous waved a hand over the console. The central hologram flickered, the light twisting and bending until it resolved into a jagged, three-dimensional rendering of the bleed. The stars were sparse here, lonely points of light separated by crushing distances. But as the recording played, the assembly gasped as one. There were structures. They were not ships in the conventional sense. They were not sleek vessels of war or fat barges of commerce. They were geometric impossibilities, vast lattices of matte black material that seemed to drink the starlight. They were rings, millions of kilometers in diameter, encircling the dying stars of the rim. They were processing plants the size of planetary systems, their surfaces bristling with technology that defied the Empire's understanding of energy manipulation. And moving between these megastructures were swarms of smaller vessels, though small was relative. Each was the size of an Imperial dreadnought. They moved with a fluid, organic precision, like a shoal of fish, executing maneuvers that would liquefy the crew of any Ethelgardian ship. But it was not the size of the structures that froze the blood of the Council. It was what they were doing. They were not mining, they were not colonizing, they were harvesting the stars. They were wrapping the suns in shells, extinguishing their light from the outside perspective, channeling the total energetic output into something else. A grid. A web that stretched into the darkness, connecting star to star, sector to sector. "They are extinguishing the galaxy," Kalen whispered, horror dawning on his face. "They are snuffing out the lights." "No," Valorous corrected, his eyes narrowed. "Look closer, the spectrum analysis. The stars are not dying, they are being insulated, preserved. They are putting the stars to sleep." Suddenly, the hologram distorted. The recording from the drone dissolved into static, replaced by a live feed. The transition was so abrupt, so seamless, that it took a moment for the Council to realize that the encryption of the High Synod, the most secure digital fortress in the galaxy, had been breached. The static cleared, revealing a bridge. It was utilitarian, stark, lacking the ornate gold and crimson aesthetics of the Empire. The crew stations were manned by bipedal figures, soft-skinned, lacking natural armor or claws. They wore simple uniforms of gray and blue. They looked fragile, weak. One of them turned to face the sensor pickup. It was a male, his face lined with age, his eyes the color of steel. He did not look like a conqueror. He looked like a tired engineer who had been interrupted in the middle of a delicate calibration. He looked at the camera, and by extension, at the thousands of alien dignitaries in the chamber, with an expression of mild curiosity and profound, crushing patience. "This is Admiral Elias Thorne of the Terran Stewardship," the figure spoke. The translation software of the Synod lagged for a second, struggling to parse the linguistic roots of a language that had never been catalogued, before settling on a synthesis that resonated with perfect clarity in the chamber. "We received your drone. We apologize for the dampening field. We are currently conducting high-energy maintenance on the local stellar cluster and realized your sensor equipment was unshielded. We sent it back before the radiation cooked its circuitry. We assume this means you are finally ready to talk." Silence, absolute, paralyzed silence. General Thraxus was the first to break it, his pride overriding his shock. "Identify yourselves," he roared, stepping toward the hologram. "You are trespassing in the sovereign territory of the Ethelgardian Empire. You are violating the edicts of the Rim. Surrender your vessels and prepare to be boarded, or we will unleash the full might of the Imperial Armada." The human, Admiral Thorne, did not flinch. He did not puff up his chest or bare his teeth. He simply blinked, a slow, deliberate motion, and looked down at a console before looking back up. "General," he said, his voice calm, devoid of mockery but filled with a terrifying pity. "We have been monitoring your empire for 6,000 years. We watched you discover fire. We watched you split the atom. We watched you conquer your neighbors. You are children playing in a sandbox, and we have been the ones making sure the tide doesn't come in and wash you away. Do not speak to us of territory. We are not trespassers. We are the gardeners, and you have grown loud enough to wake the neighbors." The sheer arrogance of the statement struck the assembly like a physical blow. To be called children by these soft, shell-less creatures. "You dare," Valorous hissed, his diplomatic veneer cracking. "You claim to be watchers. If you are so powerful, why hide in the dark? Why skulk at the edge of the universe?" Thorne's expression hardened, the tiredness in his eyes replaced by a glint of steel. We do not hide because we are afraid of you, High Archon. We hide because if you knew what lies beyond the edge, what we are keeping out, your civilization would collapse from the sheer weight of its own insignificance. But, he paused, looking off-screen for a moment as if listening to a report. The parameters have changed. The barrier is stressing. We can no longer work in the shadows. We need resources. We need logistics. And unfortunately, we need you. The screen flickered. I am sending a coordinate key, a single vessel, unarmed. Bring your leaders, bring your scientists, leave your guns. If you bring weapons, we will disable them. If you attempt to fire, we will dismantle your ships down to the atomic bonds. Come to the edge. It is time you saw the wall we have built for you. The connection severed, the hologram vanished. The chamber erupted. Screams of outrage, shouts for war, cries of terror. But Valorous sat frozen on his throne. He had seen the eyes of the human. He had seen the immense, crushing weight behind them. That was not the look of a conqueror. It was the look of a man holding a door shut against a hurricane. "Prepare my personal shuttle," Valorous commanded, his voice cutting through the noise. "Archon, you cannot obey them," Thraxus bellowed. "It is a trap." "If they wanted us dead, General," Valorous said, standing up, his old joints popping, "they would have extinguished our suns instead of insulating theirs. We are going, and may the ancestors protect us from what we find." The journey to the coordinates provided by the humans was unlike any voyage Valorous had ever undertaken. The Imperial shuttle, the Void's Herald, was a masterpiece of Ethelgardian engineering, capable of skimming the subspace currents at speeds that turned stars into streaks of light. Yet, as they approached the 7th sector, the ship's navigational computers began to scream. The geometry of space here was wrong. It was too dense, too ordered. The chaotic fluctuations of quantum foam that usually battered the hull were smoothed out, as if the vacuum itself had been paved. Subminister Kalen sat opposite Valorous, clutching a datapad like a talisman. "The readings are impossible, Archon," he whispered. "The gravitational constants in this sector are calibrated, artificial. It's as if someone reached into the fundamental code of the universe and rewrote the variables to increase stability, the energy required. It exceeds the total output of our empire since its founding." "Quiet, Kalen," Valorous murmured, though he felt the same sickness. He looked out the viewport. The stars of the rim were gone. In their place was a darkness so absolute it hurt the eyes. Then they passed through the veil. The shuttle shuddered as it crossed an invisible threshold, a membrane of energy that washed over the sensors like a tidal wave. And then the darkness broke. They were inside. Valorous forgot to breathe. Kalen dropped his datapad. Even the pilot, a cybernetically augmented drone chosen for its lack of emotion, let out a garbled sound of awe. They were not in a solar system. They were in a machine. Before them lay a structure of such scale that the mind refused to process it. It was a ring, but that word was insufficient. It was a Dyson construct, but inverted. It wrapped around not a star, but a tear in reality. In the center of the vast, rotating mechanism which spanned the diameter of a solar system was a swirling vortex of violet and black, a wound in the fabric of the universe. And around this wound, the humans had built a clamp. Millions of ships, ranging from small fighters to hulks the size of moons, moved in synchronous orbit around the structure. Beams of pure energy, blindingly white, shot from the pylons of the ring into the vortex, stitching it, burning it, holding it back. The scale was industrial, utilitarian, and terrifying. "This is not a colony," Valorous whispered. "It is a fortress." The Void's Herald was guided by a tractor beam, a soft, irresistible hand that pulled them toward one of the massive orbital platforms. As they drew closer, the details of the human engineering became visible. It was scarred. The hull of the station was pockmarked with craters, scorched by energies that had stripped the metal down to its skeleton. This place had seen war. Not the political skirmishes of the Empire, but a war of attrition that had lasted for eons. They docked in a hangar bay that could have swallowed the Imperial capital city. The airlock cycled, and Valorous, flanked by Kalen and 2 ceremonial guards, armed only with energy staves, stepped onto the deck. They were met not by an honor guard, but by a medical team and engineers who barely spared them a glance as they rushed past, pushing hover gurneys carrying wounded humans. The humans were bleeding, their armor shattered, their skin burned. They looked exhausted, their faces gray with fatigue. "This way," a voice called out. Admiral Thorne stood waiting for them. In person, he looked even more tired. He wore a simple jumpsuit, stained with grease and what looked like dark blood. He held a helmet under his arm. "Welcome to the Bastion," Thorn said, his voice flat. "I'd offer you a tour, but we're in the middle of a breach cycle. You'll have to keep up." "Breach cycle?" Valorous asked, hurrying to match the human's long strides. The gravity here was heavier than on the homeworld, but the human moved through it with the ease of one born to the burden. "The tier," Thorn gestured vaguely toward the ceiling. "It breathes. Every few days, the pressure from the outside spikes, the fabric thins, things try to get in, we push them back. Usually the automated systems handle it. Today it required a manual reset of the containment coils. We lost 3 frigates." He said it so casually. We lost 3 frigates, 3 ships likely crewed by thousands, dismissed as a maintenance cost. What is the outside?" Kalen squeaked, trotting to keep up. Thorn stopped at a bulkhead door. He turned, his steel eyes boring into the small scholar. "Entropy, chaos. The universe you live in, the one you think is so vast, is a bubble, a pocket of stability in a sea of discordant noise. Outside this bubble, the laws of physics you cherish, cause and effect, time, thermodynamics, they don't apply. There are entities there, concepts that hunger for structure just so they can unravel it. We call them the discords." He opened the door, revealing a command center that overlooked the central vortex. The view was apocalyptic. Through the viewport, Valorous could see the tier pulsing. It looked like a bruised eye. And from within the purple mists, shapes were forming, jagged non-Euclidean geometries that hurt to look at. They lashed out, striking the containment field, causing ripples of golden fire to spread across the barrier. "We found this tier 10,000 years ago," Thorn explained, walking to a tactical table. "Humanity was young then. We had just cracked FTL. We thought we were explorers. We came out here to the edge looking for new worlds. Instead, we found the leak. The universe is dying, Archon. It's been dying for billions of years. This tier is the death wound. If it opens, the vacuum state of our universe collapses. Everything, from your throne world to the furthest star, ceases to exist in a nanosecond." Valorous stared at the screen, watching a human dreadnought ram itself into a manifesting horror, detonating its core to drive the entity back into the rift. You fight this alone?" Valorous asked, his voice trembling. "We tried to ask for help once," Thorn said, looking down at the map. "Long ago, we met a species, the precursor to your empire, I believe, the Zaltath. We told them. They panicked. They tried to use the rift as a weapon. They tried to bargain with the discords. It nearly destroyed the sector. We had to remove them." The casual admission of genocide hung in the air. "We realized then that the galaxy wasn't ready. You were too young, too fracture. You fought over resources, over ideology. You couldn't comprehend a threat that didn't want your land but wanted your existence. So we made a choice." Thorn looked up, and for the first time, Valorous saw a profound sadness in the human's face. "We decided to be the shield. We faked our extinction in the inner systems. We moved our entire civilization to the rim. We militarized our culture, our biology, our very souls. We built the Aegis. We harvest the stars to power the magnetic clamps that hold the universe together. Every star you see vanishing from your charts is a battery we've plugged into the wall to keep the lights on for one more day." "But why?" Kalen whispered, tears forming in his large, dark eyes. "Why save us? You don't know us. We are conquerors. We are cruel. We have enslaved worlds." Thorn smiled, a dry, cracking expression. "Because we were you once. We were conquerors, too. We know that given time, you grow out of it. We wanted to give you that time. We wanted to give you the chance to become something better. We are the parents holding the door shut while the children sleep." "But you are failing," Valorous said, pointing to the red warning lights pulsing on the tactical board. "Yes," Thorn admitted. "The tier is widening, the discords are adapting, our tech has plateaued. We are running out of stars to harvest, and we are running out of men to die. That is why we called you. We don't need your fleets to fight. Your ships are made of paper compared to what is needed here. We need your minds, we need your resources, we need your industrial capacity." Thorn pressed a button and the hologram changed. It showed a schematic of the galaxy. "We are not just holding the line anymore. We are building a lifeboat. The physics of this universe are terminal. We cannot patch the leak forever. We have to leave." The concept was so vast, so terrifying, that Valorous felt his knees weaken. He collapsed into a chair, his 4 hands shaking. The Ethelgardian Empire, the master of the stars, was nothing more than a passenger on a sinking ship, and the humans were the crew desperately trying to build a raft before the water swallowed them all. "You want us to help you, evacuate the galaxy?" Valorous asked. "No," Thorn said. "We can't move everyone. There isn't time. We want you to help us finish the project." He brought up a new image. It was a single, massive vessel, larger than a star system. It was the structure they were currently standing on. The Aegis isn't just a wall, Thorne said softly. It's an engine. We aren't going to leave the galaxy. We are going to move it. The silence that followed was total. To move a galaxy, to detach their island of stars from the crumbling bedrock of spacetime and sail it into a new, stable vacuum. It was madness. It was divinity. We have the engine, Thorne continued. But we lack the fuel. To start the reaction, to shear us away from the dying embrace of this universe, we need a spark, a massive injection of psionic and kinetic energy. Thorne looked at Valoris. We need the psychic resonance of 1 trillion minds. We need unity. We need the Ethel Guardian Empire to stop fighting, to link its consciousness with ours, and to push. We need you to stop being conquerors and start being pilots. Valoris looked at the human. He saw the scars, the exhaustion, the sheer, indomitable will that had kept the dark at bay for millennia. He thought of his throne, his squabbling council, his generals playing with toy soldiers while these gods died in the cold. A feeling swelled in his chest. It was not fear, it was not pride. It was shame, deep, burning shame, and from that shame a resolve was born. We did not know, Valoris said, his voice choking. We thought we were alone, we thought we were the strong ones. You are strong, Thorne said, placing a hand on the Archon's shoulder. The touch was warm, heavy. You just spent your strength on the wrong things, now you have a purpose. The Council will not believe me, Valoris said. They will think it is a trick. Then show them, Thorne said. Take the data, take the recordings of our dead, take the history of the last 10,000 years, show them the price of their safety. Valoris returned to the High Synod, but he was not the same Archon who had left. He walked into the obsidian chamber, his stride long and purposeful. The council was in an uproar, General Thraxus shouting about mobilization, about striking the humans while they were distracted. Valoris ascended the dais. He did not sit. He stood before the microphone, his presence radiating a cold, furious gravity. Silence, he roared, his voice amplified to a deafening volume. The chamber quieted. You speak of war, Valoris said, his voice trembling with suppressed emotion. You speak of glory, you are fools, we are all fools. He activated the projector. He did not show them the maps. He did not show them the engine. He showed them the faces. He showed them the helmet cam footage of a human marine, alone in a decompressed corridor, holding off a swarm of writhing, geometric horrors with a vibro blade, screaming not in anger, but in defiance, buying time for his squad to seal a bulkhead. He showed them the video of a human mother, an engineer, saying goodbye to her children before entering a radiation-flooded reactor chamber to manually restart a containment field, knowing she would not come out. He showed them the graveyards, the endless, orbiting rings of coffins that circled the dark stars of the rim. He showed them the weeping. He showed them the secret logs of the human high command, debating whether to let the inner galaxy die to save themselves, and always choosing to sacrifice their own to save the unsuspecting trillions who played at war in the safety of the core. They have been dying for us, Valoris whispered into the silence. For 10,000 years, while we bickered over trade routes and borders, they have been feeding themselves into the meat grinder of entropy to keep our sky from falling. He looked at General Thraxus. The great warrior was weeping. Tears streamed down his chitinous face, his mandibles trembling. The horror of the revelation, the crushing weight of the debt they owed, broke the arrogance of the Empire in an instant. They do not ask for our submission, Valoris said, his voice breaking. They ask for our help. The universe is ending. The long night is coming, but they have built a lantern. They ask us to help them light it. Valoris looked up at the holographic stars, the stars that were still there only because humans had died to keep them burning. I say we answer, Valoris declared. I say we dismantle the fleets. I say we turn every gun into a thruster, every shield into a hull plate. I say we go to the edge, not as masters, but as brothers. The roar that went up from the chamber was not the roar of conquerors. It was the roar of the awakened. It was a sound of grief, of gratitude, and of terrifying purpose. The Great Migration took a century. The Ethel Guardian Empire dissolved, replaced by the Galactic Coalition. Old feuds were forgotten, not because of treaties, but because they became irrelevant in the face of the truth. When you know the house is burning, you do not argue over who owns the chair. You grab the bucket. Billions of ships streamed toward the 7th sector. They brought metal. They brought energy cells, they brought food, but mostly they brought hope. The humans, who had grown gray and grim in their isolation, were shocked by the arrival. They had expected reluctant allies. Instead, they got a galaxy on its knees, begging to share the burden. Valoris, now ancient and kept alive by cybernetics, stood once more on the bridge of the Aegis alongside Admiral Thorn. The structure was complete. The engine was primed. The tear in the universe was now a gaping maw, the discords pouring through in a tide of madness. The human defense lines were buckling, but they were not alone. Ethelgardian dreadnoughts stood hull to hull with Terran cruisers, forming a wall of defiance. "It is time," Thorn said. "The resonance link is established," Valoris reported. "Every mind in the fleet, every mind in the core worlds. We are listening, we are ready." Thorn nodded. He reached out and placed his hand on the activation lever. He hesitated. "We might not survive the transition," Thorn said. "The sheer forces, it might rip the galaxy apart." "Better to die flying than to die sleeping," Valoris said. He placed his hand over Thorn's. Together they pushed. The engine roared. It was a sound that was not heard but felt, a vibration that rattled the soul. The stars of the galaxy flared. The psionic web of 1,000,000,000 minds surged, a collective shout of I am against the encroaching nothing. The universe screamed, the fabric of space-time tore. And the galaxy moved. It lurched away from the cliff edge of entropy, shearing off from the dying universe like a lifeboat cutting its ropes. The darkness of the outside howled, clawing at the barrier, but the combined will of human and alien, the shield of the Aegis, held. They slipped into the slipstream of the multiverse, a glowing island of order in the chaotic sea. Silence returned to the bridge. The red warning lights turned green. The tear was gone. The sensors showed a new sky, strange, vibrant nebulae, laws of physics that tasted fresh and clean. Thorn slumped against the console, sliding down to the floor. Valoris knelt beside him. "We did it," Thorn wheezed, his eyes closing. "We made it." "Yes," Valoris said, tears leaking from his old eyes. "You saved us." "No," Thorn whispered, a faint smile on his lips. "You saved us. We were just holding the door. You walked through it." The Admiral's breathing slowed, then stopped. The stress of the connection, the centuries of duty, had finally taken their toll. Valoris bowed his head. Around the bridge, humans and aliens alike stood in silence. They did not cheer. They wept. They wept for the man who lay on the deck. They wept for the empty chairs in the mess halls. They wept for the long, cold vigil in the dark. But as Valoris looked up at the new stars, he realized they were not weeping from sorrow. They were weeping because, for the first time in 10,000 years, the galaxy was safe. The orphans had found their way home, and the parents could finally rest. And in the archives of the new era, inscribed on the central monolith of the new capital, was a simple phrase, written in the language of Earth and the glyphs of Ethelgard. "Here lies humanity. They found us in the dark, and they burned themselves to give us light.